The mountain air was thin and cold as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen adjusted his radio equipment one final time. His team of 4 Navy SEALs had been inserted into the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan 3 days ago, with a simple mission: gather intelligence on a suspected Taliban weapons cache hidden in the remote village of Karez Mir. What started as a routine reconnaissance operation was about to become something far more dangerous. Chen's team consisted of seasoned professionals. Petty Officer Jake Sullivan served as their communications specialist, his fingers constantly working to maintain contact with base camp 40 miles away. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Rodriguez carried the medical supplies and had saved more lives than she cared to count during her 3 tours. The 4th member was Petty Officer David Kim, their demolitions expert who could turn anything into a weapon if needed. They had established their observation post on a rocky outcrop overlooking the village, using advanced optics to monitor the daily activities below. For 2 days, everything seemed normal. Farmers tended their fields, children played in dusty streets, and merchants sold goods in the small marketplace. But Chen's instincts told him something was wrong. The village was too quiet, too organized. There were no random movements, no chaos that typically marked civilian settlements in this region. On the 3rd morning, Rodriguez spotted them first through her binoculars. Men in dark clothing moving between buildings with military precision, carrying weapons that gleamed in the early sunlight. They weren't local farmers or merchants. These were trained fighters, and they were setting up defensive positions throughout the village. Chen realized they had walked into a trap. Sullivan tried desperately to reach base camp on the radio, but the mountains were interfering with their signal. Static filled their headphones, broken only by brief moments of clarity that weren't long enough to transmit their location or situation. They were on their own, surrounded by an unknown number of enemy fighters who clearly knew they were being watched. As the sun climbed higher, more armed men appeared in the village below. Chen counted at least 30, but suspected there were many more hidden in the buildings. They had modern weapons, including what appeared to be heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. This wasn't a small Taliban cell they had stumbled upon. This was a major staging area for a planned operation, possibly an attack on coalition forces in the region. The situation became critical when Kim noticed movement on the ridges surrounding their position. The enemy wasn't just fortifying the village. They were moving to encircle the SEAL team. Dark figures could be seen climbing the rocky slopes, moving with purpose toward their observation post. The hunters had become the hunted, and time was running out quickly. Chen made the difficult decision to abandon their carefully concealed position and move to higher ground. They gathered their equipment quickly but quietly, knowing that any noise could give away their exact location to the fighters closing in around them. The nearest safe extraction point was over 2 miles away through hostile territory, and they would have to move during daylight with enemies actively searching for them. As they prepared to move out, Sullivan finally managed to get a brief radio connection to base camp. The transmission lasted only seconds, but it was enough to send their coordinates and a simple message that chilled everyone who heard it. Compromised, surrounded, need immediate extraction. Then the radio went dead again, leaving them alone in the mountains with dozens of armed fighters hunting them like prey. The 4 SEALs began their dangerous journey across the rocky terrain, knowing that every step could be their last. Behind them, the village buzzed with activity as more fighters arrived and search parties were organized. Ahead lay treacherous mountain paths and an uncertain future, but they were Navy SEALs, trained for exactly these impossible situations, and they would use every skill they possessed to survive and complete their mission. The rocky terrain provided both cover and challenge as the 4 SEALs moved carefully across the mountainside. Chen led the way, using hand signals to communicate with his team as they navigated between boulders and sparse vegetation. Every few minutes they stopped to listen for sounds of pursuit, but the mountain winds made it difficult to distinguish between natural sounds and approaching enemies. Sullivan carried the damaged radio equipment, still trying to establish communication with their base camp. The weight of the gear slowed him down, but abandoning it wasn't an option. Without radio contact, they had no way to call for backup or coordinate an extraction. His fingers worked constantly with the dials and antenna, searching for any frequency that might connect them to friendly forces. After an hour of careful movement, Rodriguez spotted the first search party through a gap in the rocks below them. 8 men with automatic weapons were methodically checking every cave and crevice, moving in a disciplined formation that showed military training. They were still several hundred yards away, but closing the distance steadily. The enemy knew these mountains well and were using that knowledge to their advantage. Kim took point as they moved higher up the ridge, his demolitions training making him expert at reading terrain for both opportunities and threats. He identified several positions where they could make a stand if necessary, but also noted that the enemy would likely use the same tactical thinking. The mountain offered limited options for movement, and every choice carried deadly consequences. The situation worsened when they reached a narrow passage between 2 rock formations. The path was exposed, offering no cover for nearly 50 yards. Crossing would make them visible to anyone watching from the valley below, but going around would add hours to their journey and bring them closer to other search parties they could hear moving through the area. Chen made the decision to cross quickly, one at a time. Rodriguez went first, moving with practiced stealth across the exposed ground while the others provided overwatch. She made it safely to cover on the far side and signaled for the next person. Sullivan followed, still clutching the radio equipment, his breathing heavy from the altitude and stress of their situation. Just as Kim began his crossing, shouts echoed from the valley below. They had been spotted by one of the search parties. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, bullets striking the rocks around them and whining off into the mountain air. Kim dove for cover as chunks of stone exploded where his feet had been seconds before. The enemy fire was accurate and sustained, coming from at least 3 different positions. The SEALs were pinned down in the narrow passage with limited ammunition and no way to call for help. Chen assessed their situation quickly. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. The enemy was coordinating their attack, using radio communications to direct fire from multiple positions. Sullivan finally managed to get his radio working just as the intensity of enemy fire increased. Through bursts of static, he heard the voice of their operations center 40 miles away. The connection was weak and intermittent, but it was their lifeline to survival. He shouted their coordinates into the handset while bullets sparked off the rocks inches from his head. The response from base camp was not what they wanted to hear. The nearest helicopter support was over an hour away, and bad weather was moving in that would make extraction extremely difficult. Fighter jets were available, but the mountainous terrain and proximity of enemy forces to the SEAL position made airstrikes too dangerous. They were on their own for the immediate future. Rodriguez returned fire with her rifle, trying to suppress one of the enemy positions that had the best angle on their location. Her shots were precise and well-aimed, but the enemy fighters were using good cover and fire discipline. This wasn't a group of untrained insurgents. These were experienced fighters who knew how to conduct military operations in mountainous terrain. As the firefight continued, Chen realized they needed to break contact and find better defensive positions. Staying in their current location would eventually lead to being overrun by superior numbers. He began planning their next move, knowing that every decision could mean the difference between survival and death for his entire team. The firefight intensified as more enemy fighters joined the battle from positions throughout the mountainside. Chen counted muzzle flashes from at least 6 different locations, indicating they were facing a well-coordinated force of 20 or more fighters. The enemy had spread out in a semicircle, trying to prevent the SEALs from escaping toward their planned extraction point. Using smoke grenades to provide concealment, the team began a fighting withdrawal toward higher ground. Kim stayed behind to provide covering fire while the others moved, his rifle picking off targets of opportunity as enemy fighters tried to advance on their position. His shots were deliberate and effective, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down and disrupting their coordinated assault. Sullivan managed to maintain sporadic radio contact with base camp, providing updates on their situation and requesting immediate support. The operations center was working frantically to coordinate rescue efforts, but the harsh mountain environment and weather conditions were limiting their options. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, threatening to make helicopter operations impossible within hours. Rodriguez treated a minor shrapnel wound on Chen's arm while they took cover behind a large boulder. The fragment had come from a ricochet off the rocks, a reminder of how dangerous their situation had become. Every surface around them showed fresh scars from enemy bullets, and their defensive position was being systematically destroyed by sustained automatic weapons fire. The enemy fighters demonstrated professional military tactics, using fire and movement to advance on the SEAL position while maintaining constant pressure. They communicated using hand signals and short radio bursts, indicating a level of training and organization that surprised the Americans. This was not the typical insurgent force they usually encountered in the region. As afternoon turned toward evening, ammunition became a critical concern. Each SEAL carried only a basic combat load, designed for a reconnaissance mission rather than a prolonged firefight. Chen calculated they had perhaps an hour of sustained combat remaining before running critically low on bullets. After that, they would be forced to rely on their sidearms and whatever they could recover from fallen enemies. The tactical situation grew more desperate when enemy fighters appeared on the ridge above them, threatening to surround the SEAL position completely. These new arrivals carried heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, weapons that could easily destroy the rocky cover protecting the Americans. Chen realized they had to move immediately or face annihilation from superior firepower. Kim volunteered to create a diversion, using his remaining explosives to simulate a much larger force and draw enemy attention away from the team's escape route. He positioned his charges carefully among the rocks, setting timers that would create multiple explosions across a wide area. The plan was dangerous and would leave him exposed, but it might give the others a chance to reach better defensive positions. The explosions erupted in sequence across the mountainside, creating confusion and panic among the enemy fighters who believed they were under attack from multiple directions. Kim used the chaos to reposition himself, but enemy fire quickly concentrated on his new location. He was now separated from the rest of his team by several hundred yards of hostile territory. Sullivan's radio crackled with an urgent message from base camp. A rescue helicopter was airborne despite deteriorating weather conditions, but it could only remain in the area for a limited time before fuel constraints forced it to return. The extraction point was still over a mile away through enemy-controlled terrain, and the team would have to fight their way there under constant fire. Rodriguez spotted enemy fighters moving to cut off their escape route, carrying weapons and equipment that suggested they were preparing for a sustained siege. The enemy commander clearly intended to pin the SEALs in place until overwhelming force could be brought to bear. Time was running out, and their options were narrowing with every passing minute. Chen made the difficult decision to split his remaining team. Knowing it violated basic military doctrine but seeing no alternative, he would create a diversion to draw enemy fire, while Rodriguez and Sullivan fought their way toward the extraction point. It was a desperate gamble that relied on precise timing and extraordinary skill, but their survival depended on taking calculated risks that lesser soldiers would never attempt. The separation of the team created immediate chaos as enemy fighters struggled to track multiple targets moving in different directions. Chen's diversion worked better than expected, drawing the attention of most enemy forces as he fired from multiple positions, making it appear that a larger force was operating in his sector. His movement was calculated and precise, using every piece of cover the mountain terrain offered. Rodriguez and Sullivan moved quickly toward the extraction point, following a route that Kim had identified earlier as their best option for avoiding enemy patrols. The path led through a series of narrow ravines that provided concealment, but also limited their movement options. If they encountered enemy forces in the confined space, they would have little room to maneuver. Meanwhile, Kim found himself in a desperate situation, surrounded by enemy fighters who were closing in on his position from 3 directions. His explosives had been effective in creating confusion, but now he faced a coordinated assault from experienced fighters who had regained their composure. His ammunition was running dangerously low, and he had no way to rejoin his teammates. The weather conditions deteriorated rapidly as the storm system moved over the mountains. Strong winds began affecting the accuracy of both friendly and enemy fire, while scattered raindrops made the rocky surfaces increasingly slippery. The approaching helicopter would face extremely difficult flying conditions. Assuming it could reach the extraction point at all, Sullivan maintained intermittent radio contact with the rescue aircraft, providing updates on their position and the tactical situation. The pilot reported seeing muzzle flashes and explosions throughout the area, but was having difficulty identifying friendly forces among the chaos. The helicopter would need clear signals to locate the SEALs in the deteriorating visibility. Conditions: Chen's ammunition finally ran, critically low during a particularly intense exchange of fire with enemy forces. He had been moving constantly for over an hour, engaging multiple targets while trying to keep enemy attention focused on his sector. His rifle was down to its last magazine, and he had already switched to his sidearm twice when enemies got too close to his position. The tactical situation changed dramatically when Rodriguez spotted an enemy sniper team setting up on a ridge that would dominate the extraction point. The sniper's position would make it impossible for the rescue helicopter to land safely, and the weapon appeared to be a heavy-caliber rifle capable of damaging aircraft at considerable range. Someone would have to eliminate that threat before extraction could proceed. Rodriguez made the decision to engage the sniper team despite being outnumbered and in an exposed position. Her medical training had made her an expert marksman, as corpsmen often had to engage enemy forces while protecting wounded soldiers. She began a careful approach through rocky terrain, using every available piece of cover to get within effective range. The enemy sniper team consisted of 3 men: the shooter, a spotter, and a security element. They were well positioned on high ground with excellent fields of fire in all directions. Rodriguez realized she would get only one chance to eliminate the threat before the entire enemy force focused their attention on her position. The shot would have to be perfect. Kim's situation became desperate as enemy fighters closed to within 50 yards of his position. He had used his last explosive device and was down to his final magazine of ammunition. The rocky terrain that had provided cover was now becoming a trap, with enemy forces advancing from multiple directions. He prepared for a final stand, knowing that every minute he held their attention gave his teammates a better chance of survival. Sullivan reached the designated extraction point but found it occupied by enemy forces who had anticipated the Americans' movement. The helicopter could be heard approaching through the storm, but landing would be impossible with hostile forces controlling the area. The extraction plan was falling apart, and new options had to be found quickly. The sound of the approaching rescue helicopter energized both friendly and enemy forces. The SEALs knew it represented their only chance of survival, while the enemy fighters saw an opportunity to shoot down an American aircraft and eliminate the trapped Special Operations team. The next few minutes would determine whether the mission ended in successful extraction or complete disaster for all involved. Rodriguez positioned herself carefully among the rocks, calculating wind speed and distance to the enemy sniper team on the opposite ridge. Through her rifle scope, she could see the sniper adjusting his weapon to engage the approaching helicopter. The range was nearly 400 yards, a challenging shot under perfect conditions, but the mountain winds and failing light made it extremely difficult. Her first shot missed by inches, alerting the sniper team to her presence. The enemy spotter immediately began searching for her position, while the sniper shifted his aim toward her location. Rodriguez had perhaps 30 seconds before they would locate her and return accurate fire. She adjusted her scope settings and controlled her breathing, preparing for the most important shot of her career. The rescue helicopter appeared through the storm clouds, flying dangerously low to avoid the worst of the weather. The pilot was clearly struggling with the difficult conditions, fighting crosswinds that threatened to slam the aircraft into the mountainside. Radio communications were broken and intermittent, making coordination between air and ground forces nearly impossible. Chen heard the helicopter approaching and realized he had to create enough confusion to allow it to land safely. With his remaining ammunition, he began engaging enemy positions across a wide area, trying to simulate a much larger force and draw attention away from the extraction point. His shots were carefully planned to maximize their psychological impact on enemy fighters. Sullivan fought his way through enemy forces controlling the original extraction point, using grenades and accurate rifle fire to clear a path toward an alternative landing site he had identified earlier. The area was smaller and more dangerous for the helicopter, but it might be their only option. He marked the location with infrared signals that would be visible to the aircraft's night vision systems. Kim's final stand was interrupted by the sound of the helicopter, giving him renewed hope for survival. He had been reduced to fighting with his knife and pistol as enemy fighters closed in on his position. The rocky terrain was littered with empty ammunition magazines and equipment he had discarded to maintain mobility. His situation remained desperate, but the arrival of rescue forces changed the tactical equation. Rodriguez took her second shot just as the enemy sniper fired at the helicopter. Her bullet struck the sniper in the center of his chest, spinning him away from his weapon and eliminating the immediate threat to the rescue aircraft. However, the sniper's shot had already been fired, and she watched in horror as tracer rounds streaked toward the helicopter through the stormy sky. The helicopter pilot demonstrated exceptional skill as he maneuvered through enemy fire, using the mountainous terrain to mask his approach to Sullivan's alternative landing site. Several bullets struck the aircraft, but none hit critical systems. The crew chief returned fire with a mounted machine gun, suppressing enemy positions and providing covering fire for the SEALs on the ground. Enemy forces throughout the area began concentrating their fire on the helicopter, recognizing it as the key to the Americans' escape. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked through the air, exploding against the rocky mountainside and filling the air with deadly shrapnel. The pilot fought to maintain control as his aircraft was buffeted by explosions and crosswinds. Chen made the desperate decision to expose himself completely, standing in the open and engaging enemy forces with rapid, accurate fire that forced them to take cover. His actions drew intense enemy fire, but gave the helicopter the few seconds it needed to begin its landing approach. He knew he was likely signing his own death warrant, but his teammates' survival depended on his sacrifice. Sullivan reached the alternative extraction point and began marking it for the pilot, who was having difficulty identifying safe landing areas in the deteriorating visibility. Enemy forces were converging on the location, recognizing that preventing the helicopter from landing would trap the SEALs permanently. Time was measured in seconds rather than minutes. Kim heard the helicopter directly overhead and made his own desperate gambit, charging toward the nearest enemy position with his remaining ammunition. His sudden attack caught the fighters by surprise and disrupted their coordinated assault, just as they were preparing to overrun his position. His actions bought precious time for the extraction operation. Rodriguez began engaging enemy forces that were moving to attack the helicopter during its vulnerable landing phase. Her shots were quick and accurate, each one eliminating a specific threat to the rescue operation. She had become the guardian angel protecting the extraction, but her exposed position made her a target for every enemy fighter in the area. The helicopter touched down on the rocky mountainside, just as enemy forces launched their final coordinated assault on the SEAL positions. The next few minutes would determine whether any of the Americans would survive to tell the story of their mountain battle against overwhelming odds. The helicopter's rotors created a whirlwind of dust and debris as it settled onto the rocky landing site, its crew chief laying down suppressive fire with his machine gun. Sullivan sprinted toward the aircraft through a hail of enemy bullets, carrying critical intelligence about the weapons cache and enemy force composition that had cost so much to obtain. His radio equipment had finally failed completely, leaving only visual signals to coordinate the extraction. Chen's exposed position had drawn the attention of nearly every enemy fighter in the area, but his sacrifice was working exactly as planned. Enemy fire concentrated on his location while his teammates moved toward the helicopter. He had been hit twice, once in the leg and once in the shoulder, but continued fighting with grim determination. His ammunition was completely exhausted, leaving only his sidearm and the knowledge that every second he held their attention saved lives. Rodriguez faced her own moment of crisis as three enemy fighters flanked her position during her focused engagement of forces threatening the helicopter. She spun to engage the new threat, her medical training and combat experience combining in a deadly display of marksmanship. Her shots were quick and precise, dropping all three attackers, but not before one of them managed to wound her in the side with a grazing bullet. Kim broke free from his surrounded position during the chaos created by the helicopter's arrival, fighting his way through confused enemy forces toward the extraction point. He had discarded most of his equipment to maintain speed and mobility, carrying only his sidearm and the demolitions knowledge that might still prove useful. Behind him, enemy fighters regrouped and began pursuit through the rocky terrain. The helicopter pilot struggled to maintain position as enemy fire intensified and weather conditions continued to deteriorate. Several more bullets had struck his aircraft, including one that shattered part of his cockpit canopy. His co-pilot reported hydraulic problems and warned that they had only minutes before mechanical failures would force them to abandon the rescue attempt. The window for extraction was closing rapidly. Sullivan reached the helicopter and immediately began coordinating the pickup of his scattered teammates. The crew chief helped him aboard while maintaining continuous fire on enemy positions. Through hand signals and shouted communications over the rotor noise, they developed a plan to recover the other 3 SEALs despite the intense enemy fire and deteriorating conditions. Rodriguez began her fighting withdrawal toward the helicopter, moving from cover to cover while engaging enemy forces that tried to intercept her movement. Her wound was bleeding but not immediately life-threatening, and her medical training helped her assess what she could ignore and what required immediate attention. She bound the wound quickly while reloading her weapon, never stopping her movement toward extraction. Chen realized his position was about to be overrun and made the decision to charge the nearest enemy position rather than wait for them to eliminate him. His sudden assault caught the fighters off guard, allowing him to fight through their line and begin his own movement toward the helicopter. He was badly wounded and nearly out of ammunition, but his SEAL training drove him forward despite the pain and exhaustion. The helicopter crew chief spotted Kim fighting his way through enemy forces and directed covering fire to support his movement. The machine gun's rapid fire forced enemy fighters to take cover, giving Kim the opportunity he needed to break free and sprint the final 100 yards to the extraction point. He arrived at the helicopter just as enemy reinforcements appeared on the ridges. Around the landing site, Rodriguez reached the helicopter's position but immediately took up a defensive posture to provide covering fire for Chen, who was still fighting his way through enemy forces. Her accurate shooting eliminated several fighters who were moving to cut off his escape route. The crew chief helped her aboard while she continued firing, never abandoning her role as the team's protector. Kim climbed aboard the helicopter and immediately took up a firing position to support Chen's final approach. Despite his exhaustion and depleted ammunition, he engaged enemy targets with precise shots that disrupted their attempts to coordinate an effective assault. His demolitions expertise allowed him to identify enemy positions and weaknesses that others might miss. Chen stumbled toward the helicopter through a storm of enemy fire, his wounds making each step increasingly difficult. Rodriguez provided medical covering fire while Kim and Sullivan laid down suppressive fire on enemy positions. The helicopter pilot prepared for immediate takeoff, knowing that staying on the ground any longer would result in the destruction of his aircraft and the death of everyone aboard. In the final moments before takeoff, Rodriguez made the shot that would be remembered forever. Through her rifle scope, she identified an enemy fighter preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade at the helicopter from close range. The shot was difficult, requiring her to compensate for the helicopter's rotor wash and her own wounds. But her bullet found its mark just as the enemy fighter pulled his trigger. The grenade exploded harmlessly against the mountainside, and moments later, the helicopter lifted off into the stormy sky. The 4 SEALs had survived against overwhelming odds, bringing with them intelligence that would save countless lives in future operations. Their mountain battle had lasted over 6 hours, and they had faced more than 40 enemy fighters with superior weapons and knowledge of the terrain. But their training, teamwork, and the timely arrival of skilled rescue personnel had turned what seemed like certain death into a successful mission that would be studied by special operations forces for years to come.